Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're mapping out the actual mechanics of human behavior to decode how habits are really formed. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore the profound science of small changes, and we're going to do it by mentally flipping through a sort of visual notebook. So, get ready to completely rethink everything you thought you knew about building good habits and breaking the bad ones.
The absolute foundational secret to all of this, it's the concept of getting just 1% better every single day. Let's look at the British cycling team. These guys transformed 110 years of absolute, utter mediocrity into literal world championships. And no, they didn't do it by making massive, sweeping overhauls. They made tiny 1% tweaks. We're talking about adjusting the angle of bike seats, or even finding the perfect, most comfortable pillows for their riders to sleep on. It's crazy, right? But habits are essentially the compound interest of self-improvement.
Now, to actually sustain those 1% tweaks long-term, true behavior change has to become identity change. Let's be real. There's a massive difference between an outcome-based approach, like saying, oh, I'm trying to quit smoking, versus stepping up and claiming the actual identity of someone who says, no thanks, I'm simply not a smoker. See the difference there? When you focus on exactly who you want to become, rather than just what you want to achieve, the habits just naturally follow.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics. Every single habit you have follows a really simple four-step neurological loop. Cue, craving, response, and reward. This cycle was actually first observed way back when psychologist Edward Thorndike put cats in these little puzzle boxes. He noticed that the cats repeatedly escaped simply because the satisfying reward of the food reinforced the behavior of getting out. It's so basic, but this simple loop is the hidden foundation of literally every action you take.
So, how do we master this loop? Well, we have to start with the first law, which is make it obvious. The Japanese railway system is a brilliant example of taking control of these automatic behaviors. Get this, they reduce errors by an astounding 85%. How? By using what they call a pointing and calling system. The operators physically point at and verbally call out every single signal. What this does is it violently pulls non-conscious automatic habits right back into conscious awareness. And honestly, that is absolutely your crucial first step for making a change.
You can also drastically increase your odds of success by creating an implementation intention. That's just a fancy way of saying you need a concrete plan that states exactly when and where you'll perform a new behavior. Doing this deliberate planning prevents what's known as the Diderot effect. You know that thing where you buy one new item and it suddenly triggers this massive chain reaction of unintentional actions and purchases? Yeah, we absolutely want to avoid that.
But here is a truly wild truth. Your environment actually matters way more than your motivation. Environment is like this invisible hand just constantly shaping our behavior. Take this physician at Massachusetts General Hospital. She massively increased water consumption and crushed soda sales without talking to a single person. How? Simply by redesigning the cafeteria layout. She just placed baskets of bottled water right next to the food stations and inside the refrigerators. No willpower required from anyone, just really obvious cues placed in the environment.
Now, if we invert that law, we get the absolute easiest way to break a bad habit. Make it invisible. By reducing your exposure to the cue, the craving naturally fades away. This actually explains a fascinating historical anomaly. During the Vietnam War, about 20% of U.S. soldiers were addicted to heroin, yet when they returned home, 90% of them dropped the addiction almost overnight. It wasn't magic. They simply left their environmental triggers behind in Vietnam.
All right, so once a habit is obvious, the second law kicks in. Make it attractive. Remember, habits are just dopamine-driven feedback loops. So how on earth do you make hard things appealing? You use something called temptation bundling. You basically link a want with a need. There was this engineering student who famously hacked his stationary bike so that Netflix would only play if he pedaled fast enough. He brilliantly bundled the temptation of watching TV with the absolute need to get exercise. So think about it. What could you bundle today?
We also find habits incredibly attractive when they help us fit in. We are wired to instinctively imitate the habits of three specific groups: our close family, our tribe, and the powerful, people with high status. This is exactly how Laszlo Polgar raised three world-class chess prodigies. He didn't rely on some lucky genetic lottery. He deliberately curated a family culture and a home environment that obsessively prioritized and rewarded the game of chess.
Conversely, if you want to break a bad habit, the inversion is to make it unattractive. You can actually reprogram your brain to enjoy really hard things just by actively highlighting the benefits rather than dwelling on the drawbacks. Take this unbelievably powerful reframe. A man shifted his entire perspective on life by refusing to say he was confined to a wheelchair. Instead, he boldly stated he was liberated by it. Changing his vocabulary completely transformed his reality.
And that brings us perfectly to the third law: make it easy. Listen to this. A photography professor once split his class. He graded one group purely on quantity. They had to submit 100 photos. The other group was graded strictly on quality. They just needed to submit one perfect photo. Well, guess what? The quantity group actually ended up producing the best photos. Why? Because they learned through active repetition and real experimentation. Meanwhile, the quality group got completely bogged down in the theories of perfection without ever really taking action.
We really have to embrace the law of least effort. As humans, we naturally gravitate to the easiest options available. It's just an evolutionary truth, so we must deliberately reduce the friction for our good habits. It's actually the exact reason why agriculture spread 2 to 3 times faster across Eurasia's east-west layout compared to the Americas. Farmers could expand across the exact same climate zones without facing the massive friction of trying to domesticate new crops for totally different weather patterns.
To practically eliminate friction in your own life, implement the 2-minute rule. Whenever you start a new habit, it should take you less than 2 minutes to do. It acts as a gateway habit. There's this famous story of a guy who lost over 100 pounds. He forced himself to go to the gym every single day, but he strictly limited his stay to a maximum of 5 minutes. He knew he had to master the simple art of just showing up before he could ever worry about optimizing a workout routine. How could you scale down your next big goal into just a 2-minute action?
Now, to invert this one, you make it difficult. You can use what's called a commitment device right now in the present to restrict your own actions in the future. Facing an impossible book deadline, the famous author Victor Hugo literally took all of his clothes, locked them away in a large chest, and kept only a shawl. He made leaving the house so incredibly difficult that he basically forced himself to stay inside and write The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now that is commitment.
Finally, we reach the fourth law: make it satisfying. The golden rule here is incredibly simple. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. Public health worker Stephen Luby drastically reduced disease in Pakistan, and he didn't do it by lecturing people on education or hygiene. No, he simply provided premium, great-smelling, easily foaming soap. He made the very simple act of hand washing an instantly rewarding experience, and because of that, the habit permanently stuck.
Of course, to keep a habit satisfying over the long haul, having visual evidence of your progress is absolutely key. Consider the paperclip strategy. There was this rookie stockbroker who built incredible, unstoppable momentum by starting every single day with 120 paperclips in one jar on his desk. After every single sales call, he'd manually move one clip over to an empty jar. He used a visual tracker and stuck to the ultimate rule of consistency: never miss twice.
On the flip side, you must make failure deeply unsatisfying. Take entrepreneur Brian Harris. He added an immediate, painful cost to his own inaction by actually signing a formal habit contract. If he missed his scheduled workouts, he risked losing hundreds of dollars to his trainer, plus, and this is the kicker, the deep public humiliation of having to wear his rival sports team's hat. You've got to make the cost of skipping your habit actually hurt.
As we move into some of the more advanced tactics here, we do have to acknowledge the role of genetics. Think about Michael Phelps, who is literally the ideal swimmer, and Hicham El Guerrouj, the ideal runner. Despite massive differences in their overall height, these two elite athletes share the exact same inseam length. It's wild, but it perfectly proves that to sustain habits and achieve true world-class mastery, you must choose a field of competition that heavily favors your own natural genetic advantages.
But listen, even with the absolute perfect genetics, to succeed long-term, you actually have to fall in love with boredom. The Goldilocks rule states that peak motivation occurs right on the edge of your current abilities. Comedian Steve Martin kept himself perfectly engaged for years by maintaining his guaranteed jokes that he knew would land, but intentionally adding just 1 or 2 minutes of brand new, challenging material each year. He stayed right in that sweet spot.
Ultimately, habits plus deliberate practice equals mastery. But once a habit becomes totally automatic, how do you avoid just slipping into mindless complacency? Well, you absolutely must establish a system for review. Coach Pat Riley famously challenged the highly talented Lakers to improve their individual efforts by a mere 1%, and that led straight to back-to-back championships. Which brings us to our final challenge for you as we wrap up this explainer. Now that you know the hidden mechanics behind your daily actions, What is the single 1% change you are going to draw into your own life starting today?